Thank you so much for joining us today for this really pertinent topic. The topic that we're going to be talking about today is the prospects of security and stability in Afghanistan. My name is Zunaira Inam Khan. I'm a researcher at the Institute of Regional Studies, and I will be moderating this discussion today. Recently, there have been fears that any unrest or instability in Afghanistan could have consequences for the region, and it has given a great deal of anxiety over the future of Afghanistan. So, keeping that context in mind, the speakers that we have today are going to be discussing 4 sub-themes that are the situation post-September 2021 after the troop withdrawal in Afghanistan, the future of the Afghan peace process, the resurgence of militancy in Afghanistan, and the role of regional countries in establishing stability in Afghanistan. In that regard, I would like to welcome Ambassador Nadeem Riaz, President IRS, to give his welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Zunaira. Good morning and assalamu alaikum to everyone. It's such a pleasure that such a galaxy of speakers is with us today on a topic which is of immense importance. So Zunaira, the 4 themes which we aim to address in this webinar. But I would just like to say one thing, that peace is something which is imperative not only in Afghanistan, but also in the region. South Asia is a region which is extremely populous. It's a region in which there are frictions. And with all these frictions going on, and with the pandemic also striking the region pretty badly, it is imperative that there should be peace and stability in Afghanistan, because without that, there cannot be peace and stability in the region. We hope the international community will remain involved. It will ensure that Afghanistan gets onto the road of progress, because I think that is absolutely imperative. It is essential that the people of Afghanistan are able to make progress. They are able to become economically prosperous, and development takes place. So with these very brief remarks, I would hand the floor again to Zunaira. My request is that all of the people who want to ask questions, if they could simply type the questions, then it becomes much easier, as the questions can be then addressed by the speakers. Thank you very much, and looking forward to listening to the subject. Over to you, Zunaira.
Thank you, Ambassador Nadeem, for your sharing your views with us. I will now be moving on to the panel speakers for their views. I would like to remind the speakers that they each have 10 minutes to share their thoughts with us. And at the end of the webinar, we will be having a Q&A session where the audience is welcome to send in their questions either in the chat box, or they can raise their hand and we'll ask them to speak. I just want to make sure if Dr. SIMA Summer is online. If she is, then she has to go first. Okay, well, we'll come back to Dr. SIMA slightly later. Right now, we'll move on to our first speaker. Our first speaker is Lieutenant General Florian Koldea. He served for more than a decade as the first deputy of the director of the Romanian Intelligence Services. He has a PhD in military and intelligence sciences and a postgraduate in security and good governance. He is currently serving as a senior lecturer at the National Intelligence Academy in Bucharest. He is the proud recipient of the Alvin W. Berkeley Medallion for Partnership awarded by the CIA. He, along with the Knight of the National Order awarded by France in 2015, and Officer of the National Order awarded by the President of Romania. General Koldea, we are seeing that the US is relegating counterterrorism to a lower order of threat. However, the NSA has spoken recently about seeking bases in neighboring countries, which has led to harsh statements by the Afghan Taliban. We have already seen a rise in violence in the country. So how do you see the situation post-September 2021 after the troop withdrawal? Do you see the Taliban trying to force their dominance, maybe using bullets rather than the ballot? And how do you see the scenario unfolding? General Koldea, we can't hear you. Please unmute yourself.
First of all, thank you very much and good morning to everybody from Bucharest, Romania. I would like to thank the Institute for Regional Studies for the invitation to take part of this extremely topical discussion. Even though I'm far away, as a closer observer of the global security situation, I'm extremely interested in the developments in South Asia and the Indo-Pacific region. It's a geopolitical area, as one of the Institute Regional Study representative mentioned earlier, that has become the world's new center of gravity. Moreover, the recent US and NATO decision to withdraw their forces from Afghanistan has a particular significance for me and my country. Well aware of its responsibility as a future member of NATO and the EU, and Romania has participated with troops in Afghanistan since 2002. More than 32,000 troops till 2021 by rotation. Romania was also one of the most important contributors to the NATO Resolute Support Mission, with over 600 troops deployed, for a clear commitment to supporting the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces. That's very important. In 19 years of presence in Afghanistan, a lot of Romanian soldiers lost their lives in combat, and more people were wounded. The cost for the West, with more than 3,500 losses and many thousands of losses from Afghan forces. From this perspective, the legacy of the past 20 years in Afghanistan, it's a mixed one. It's very important to underline in this kind of circumstances that the result produced some tangible, if slow, progress, including established a more moderate administration, rebuilding some infrastructure, promoting women's education, and introducing voting. There is no doubt that given the complex domestic situation in Afghanistan, huge challenges lay ahead for its government and its people, but also for the international community, not only for Afghan people, not only for the region. That's very important to underline. The resurgence of violence is one of them, and indeed with severe consequences for Afghanistan, for the regional and the global security, a long war between Taliban and Afghan forces, a civil war, resurgence of terrorism, illegal migration, the reintegration of returnees remain very important aspects which has to be seriously taken into consideration. Apart from the Taliban, there is a broad consensus that these challenges will not be solved by military or violent solutions. So it's highly important to convince the Taliban to negotiate. For this, the US but also NATO, the EU and UN have to continue its strongly support to Afghanistan and the peace process initiated by the US-Taliban agreement and the US-Afghanistan joint declaration. Practical and concrete support, including economic, humanitarian, and security assistance in a coordinating approach. It's part of the solution. In the same time, Afghanistan neighbors and other relevant actors in the region have to increase their role. Their enhanced effort to support the Kabul government will be more than useful and could be could have positive effects on its capacity to govern and also on strengthening the national and implicitly the regional security. Pakistan helps, by my former capacity and from my experience, help was very valuable. And we have learned from other similar experiences will be detrimental for preventing even more negative security developments in its vicinity. That's very important. Based on practical experience, I strongly believe that security is detrimental for ensuring stability, prosperity, and peace. So, in my view, in order to put an end, or at least to significantly reduce the unacceptable civilian and military casualties and the assassination of judges, journalists, intellectuals, and governmental officials, of paramount importance is to continue the assistance for the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces, and to provide all the possible support to the civilian government in Kabul. I strongly agree that only Afghans can secure the peace in their country, but they need all the help from the international community because the current global security environment is too complex and too dangerous, and we simply cannot go back to the situation we were in 19 years ago. We all understand how difficult it is to manage this situation. It's not easy with the history of Afghanistan to prove that they might handle the situation, but they now definitely should be supported by all of us, by international community, by the region, no doubt. We hope that the departure in September, we know it might embolden the Taliban. We are seeing already this, but this is no doubt that they should give up. Everybody should stay at the civilian people expectation in order to do the things and to manage the situation. They cannot just say, we cannot do it. That was in few words what I want to say in this discussion. And I'm ready for discussions based on or other interlocutors' speeches or before as you wish. All. Thank you again for the invitation. It's a real pleasure, and it's very important, even if Romania looks far away from the area, our presence there required sometimes the discussion and to observe what's going on, and we are preoccupied. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much, General Koldea, for sharing your opinion and your views with us. We value your expertise and the time that you spent and decided to give to us here. I see that Dr. SIMA has joined us. Dr. SIMA SAMAR, I'll just introduce her. Dr. SIMA SAMAR was appointed as a member of the United Nations Secretary General's High-Level Panel on Internal Displacement in December 2019. In addition to her role as a panel member, she is a member of the UN Secretary General's High-Level Advisory Board on Mediation. She has held the position of Special Envoy of the President of Afghanistan and State Minister for Human Rights and International Affairs. She has served as Chairperson of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, Minister of Women's Affairs, and as one of the only 2 women in the transition government at that time, Vice Chair of the Emergency Lawyer Jirga, and as UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Sudan. She was the first chairperson of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, and she has established the non-profit Gohar Shad Institute of Higher Education. Dr. SAMAR, thank you so much for joining us, and we're so grateful for you to be willing to come here and share your expertise with us. Dr. SAMAR, as we know that the situation of Afghanistan right now is optimistic, but it is precarious. There are fears that the unrest in Afghanistan could have dire consequences for the entire region. With this in mind, what do you see as the role of regional actors and countries in the stability of Afghanistan? What do you see their role as in aiding the forging of a consensus on political power sharing? Or do you even see a role for regional countries in this peace process or in this movement that we're seeing? Thank you.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum and good morning. I'm sorry that I joined late, but thank you very much for organizing this program. And I hope that we will have a constructive discussion in order to be useful in the region and also in my country. I would like to mention a few points that I would like to raise among between us and to this in this conference. Number one, I think we, like it or not, we are neighbors and we are not in a situation to choose our neighbor. So we need to make more understanding between the two neighbors, because we do not have a choice to choose our neighbor and we can live together. The second point that I would like to mention is also that we, like it or not, the stability in peace in Afghanistan has direct impact on the stability and peace in the region and also in the world, not only in the region, but also in the world. And that is the fact that we cannot deny it. The third point that I would like to mention is that we do have a lot of same thing, or a lot of kind of shared values and culture between the two countries, between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Like we have Pashto on the both sides of the Durand line, we have Baloch also in some part of that line, and we cannot deny that reality. And that itself can be a reason of more constructive work and activity among ourselves. The fourth point that I would like to mention, which is also that is the truth and the reality in the last so many years between the two countries, is that we, like it or not, the truth and the reality, if you really want to burn your neighbor house, the fire will reach you. If the fire doesn't reach you, the smoke will reach you definitely, as we see it between Afghanistan and Pakistan, with the so many problems between the two countries, or so many issues that we can really cooperate in order to solve those issues, including the smuggling of opium and all these other gangs, groups, and so on between the two countries. Number 5, I think there's another fact that we cannot deny it, and that is the acknowledgement of the problem between the two countries. And we should really come together honestly and say that we have 1, 2, 3 issues or problems. Let's sit together and try to solve it. Because the denial that we have, we are living in a denial mood, unfortunately, both of our countries, not the people, but mainly the governments. The denial of the fact will not change the fact. That is another fact that we cannot deny it, and we should really acknowledge on that. Number 6, I think the terrorist groups or the fundamentalist groups that we have in our countries, or they're growing, unfortunately, in the region, is not only a problem for Afghanistan. The truth is that it is a problem for our neighboring countries as well, not only for Pakistan, but also in the other neighboring countries. And that is really wasting a lot of our financial resources rather than putting on development and in alleviation of the poverty from our countries. It goes to military activities. That is also another fact that we cannot ignore it. Number 7, I think, again, I repeat myself on the issues of drug, and the opium which is produced in Afghanistan does cause a lot of problem in Pakistan. See that the number of the people who are addicted to the opium and the other whatever drugs or medicines, whatever you call it, coming from the opium production and the hashish in Afghanistan. And it is a big burden on both countries, actually, because we lose our youth and a lot of energies and power which can be used for the construction of the country, for development of the countries, but it goes to, I mean, unfortunately, become a burden on the shoulder of the family and also on the families and increase the poverty within our countries. Number 8, I think that the other issue that we have in common, unfortunately, as we have all other issues in common, is the violation of human rights in both of our countries, and also the gender gap between the two countries. And that is also one of the problems that we see it, and it has impact, direct or indirect impact on the both sides of the line, including the behavior of this fundamentalist group or terrorist group against women. We like it or not, it does have impact on both of our countries, and then it have a negative impact on the development and progress in our societies. Number 9, I think what I believe is that both sides, the people of Pakistan and the people of Afghanistan, has to come together and try to solve whatever we have and try to be honest and find a solution for the problem that we have. And that is something I think I would call on our neighboring countries, that we have to stop the blame game. And we do this blame game every day. And there are some facts that we cannot ignore it. And in your country and my country and also in the region. And that is have a negative impact on all of us. So I think there's stability in Afghanistan, and the progress in Afghanistan is key for the region and also for the international community, because we saw it. We have to learn from the history, and should not allow to be repeated in the coming future or for our next generation. So the final point that I would like to mention is, maybe I'll not be the final, but at least the number that I count, is that we need to promote human rights in our countries. Because the promotion and protection of human rights in Pakistan, and the promotion and protection of human rights in human rights-based approach itself is reducing the tension among the societies. The second problem that we have, all the other issues that we learn, our people unfortunately learn from each other, the bad things and also the good things. So the bad activities, the bad behavior by these groups actually undermines all of our good and positive relationship between the. And this is something that we need to focus on it. And the rights of the people, or the principle of human rights, respect for principle of human rights in both of the countries, including their rights to political rights and rights to election and vote, is something that really promote the democratic values in our country. And that is so far, up to now, the only solution for the problems in our countries is promotion of human rights and democracy. And democracy as a core value of the people's rights to decide about their future and make a decision and choose their leadership within that system. And that will be, I think, like it or not, it will have an impact on the other countries. And we, again, I repeat myself that we cannot deny these issues. The other point that I insist, that if we really have an approach based on human rights, then we really reduce the amount of money that we use on militarization. and military activities in both of the country. We can use it on the development and progress of our countries, and the people on both sides of the line can live with dignity and rights. And that itself is reducing the tension, and hopefully we will go to that direction and get out of the problem that we exist. Afghanistan has been at war. Different regime came and gone, and the violation of human rights continued. And actually, something that unfortunately is ignored in our region is the fight against corruption and the fight against the nepotism and violation of human rights. The culture of impunity, unfortunately, continues in both countries. We learn from each other. And as I said, that we have to learn from each other's positive behavior rather than our negative behavior. I'll stop here. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. SAMAR. And I think that it's very pertinent that you mentioned that fire in your neighbor's house will essentially transfer to yours as well. And I think that's something that I think for regional cooperation and regional stability, it's something that we must hold on to. And also the importance of democracy and the importance of human rights. And I think that's a really good point to segue into our next speaker, who is the youngest person on our panel. He is representing the new younger face of Afghanistan. And it's a generation which has a lot of hope pinned on it, and a lot of responsibility has been handed to them. I'm just going to introduce him, Mr. JAWAD ZAWULISTANI. He is the Managing Director of Afghanistan Human Rights and Democracy Organization. He has completed a master's degree in conflict resolution and coexistence at the Heller School for Social Policy and Management. He worked as the organization's program manager and led several projects focusing on empowering victims of war, promoting human rights, and addressing ethnic conflict in Afghanistan. Prior to that, he worked as an analyst and researcher with leading Afghan media focusing on topics of conflict, peace, and security in Afghanistan. He is interested in initiatives that promote youth-led peace, foster dialogue and understanding, and empower both youth and war victims to make meaningful societal contributions. Protecting human rights in conflict-affected contexts and promoting inclusive conflict transformation policies and approaches are his other areas of professional interest. Mr. ZAWULISTANI, there's a lot riding on the Afghan peace process and the dialogue. There's been talk about the Taliban simply waiting till the Americans leave to assert force. So what, in your opinion, is probably the ideal power sharing agreement, and what could be the spoilers to that process? And furthermore, could you shed some light on the peace building and transitional justice perspective?
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Zunaira, and thank you to the Institute of Regional Studies for organizing this timely event on the prospects of peace and security in Afghanistan. I will try to briefly state the context for my discussion, as well as will try to offer some entry points for youth engagement and civil society engagement, both in Afghanistan and at a regional level, in making a sustainable and just peace possible. So it is a pleasure to be speaking at this important event on the prospects of security and stability in Afghanistan, along with very distinguished panelists who are generously sharing their knowledge and experience with us to contribute to a better understanding of peace and conflict dynamics of Afghanistan and issues of common interest in the region between Afghanistan and Pakistan. I'm very grateful to Dr. SAMAR's sharing her experience and her emphasis on the importance of protection of promotion of human rights in the region. We have benefited from her services, commitment, and dedication to human rights for several years, for several decades. And here at the outset, I would like to express my gratitude and my generation's gratitude to her sacrifices on these important vital issues. I am sure that more of such regional dialogues and track 2 engagements and exchanges will improve people's understanding of common opportunities and threats to peace and stability in the region. It will also contribute to better mobilization of resources among academia, researchers, human rights activists, and civil society in Afghanistan and Pakistan in making a peaceful, prosperous region a reality that our generation can enjoy. And I genuinely hope that the end result, albeit not anytime soon, of such discussion would be new thinking, vision, and leadership for stability, peaceful coexistence, and prosperity in the region, whose people deserve way better and have all the potential to realize those objectives. Afghanistan people search for peace, justice, and a dignified life among other communities and along other nations into this world have never stopped, despite them being at the receiving end of violence, bloodshed, and its other byproducts, which to some extent were highlighted by Dr. SAMAR and the risks that will involve. But the aspiration and hopes of the people of Afghanistan have repeatedly, unfortunately, encountered unsurmountable hurdles that have perpetuated the suffering of our people and has pushed us into a new cycle of conflict without allowing our people to reclaim their denied agency over their life and their country. More than 4 decades of conflict and failed peace-building efforts in Afghanistan is a testament to the fact that any peace efforts that do not genuinely and substantively engage the people of Afghanistan and remains only an elite-driven undertaking will not bring peace to the country. Despite the emergence of a totally different environment after the fall of the Taliban in late 2001, and high hopes of Afghanistan's people for putting an end to their decades-long suffering, all opportunities were sadly squandered by elite political competitions and contestations, failure in designing and developing participatory and democratic governance mechanisms and structures, and most importantly, a complete and costly disregard of countries' millions of victims of war and their demands for justice and accountability and the need for healing the open wounds. So gradually, a strong culture of impunity was further entrenched and formed in the country. The obvious result was further erosion of the sanctity of human life, and that peace building and development efforts strayed away from the core objective of healing, truth, reconciliation, and state reforms as means of addressing the root causes of conflict in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, no lessons were learned from these bitter experiences. The peace negotiation in Doha between the US and the Taliban took place in complete absence of Afghanistan's people and government. And unfortunately, the Afghan civil society, the Afghan youth, and millions of victims of war and the participation of Afghan women were minimal. And so far, we haven't seen any strong political will among any of the key stakeholders of the Afghan peace negotiation to make the inclusion of these important stakeholders a reality, to make the Afghanistan peace process successful, sustainable, and just. But still, the situation is totally different, and that is thanks to the emergence of a strong civil society in Afghanistan, a free media, and most importantly, the great capital of the country, which is the young population of Afghanistan, which comprise the majority of the Afghan population, and they have all the means, all the potentials and willing ability and vision to make Afghanistan a different place, a different country. But unfortunately, so far, their agency, vision, idea for development of the country has continuously been ignored. Despite this unfavorable situation for civil society engagement, for human rights engagement, for youth engagement, we have been able to chart a different way when it comes to the Afghan peace process. And that has been that we have advanced a strong discussion, debate among the Afghan civil society, and to some extent at different levels of policy making, that an inclusive peace would not, an inclusive peace is the only way for the country to see peace. Otherwise, an elite political agreement will only remain a political agreement, of which we have seen several and dozens in the past decades, but none of them could bring peace to Afghanistan. And that was the emphasis of the Afghan civil society in general, and the emphasis of us at Afghanistan Human Rights and Democracy Organization, to make the Afghan peace process a victim-centered peace process in which all efforts are concentrated on the important issue of healing, addressing victims' demands and root causes of conflict, as well as providing guarantees for non-repetition of the violations. That means to address and end the strong culture of impunity in the country. And this all would not possible without victims of war, without women, without the youth of Afghanistan have substantive participation and inclusion in the entire stage of the peace building efforts in Afghanistan, including the peace negotiation that should be made possible through direct engagement in forms of, for example, victims being able to deliver their testimonies, and other groups being also present at the negotiating table, and also having the chance to provide inputs and insights and be regularly consulted on issues, on key issues of peace and security and stability in Afghanistan. So having this in mind, I think the biggest challenge to the current peace negotiation in the country and making a sustainable and just peace possible in Afghanistan is lack of a genuine political engagement to the idea of sustainable and just peace in Afghanistan. Our engagement with different stakeholders, including the Afghan government, shows that unfortunately such willingness and such political will have yet to take shape within the policy-making circles in Afghanistan. And the other trait that actually emerged from the onset of the peace negotiation, led by the US government, was that it happened, as I already mentioned, in the complete absence of the Afghan people, the Afghan government. So that once again, maybe for dozens time being repeated, denied the agency and even I could say the legitimacy of the local voices of the Afghan people's voices. So that resulted in an emboldened and internationally recognized Taliban, who not only were emboldened to deny people's claims and people's voices, but also saw them in a position that they could take over the country militarily, and they were justified and legitimate to do that. So for that, in order not to be continued and perpetuated, and to help the people of Afghanistan realize their dream of a peaceful country, I think it is very important that that new leadership, new thinking emerges on the both at the national and regional level, and I believe that is not possible without developing and revising new human rights based approaches and frameworks on issues of peace and stability in Afghanistan and the region, as well as without the engagement of youth and civil society of the region. I think civil society and youth are, in both countries can pressure their governments for accountability and for making adjust and for making a coexistence between the two nations possible. And that requires leadership and vision, which unfortunately the several past decades in both countries shows that such leadership and vision is non-existent, and the recent developments in both countries unfortunately do not provide so much hope. But still, we can push for that, because the spillover conflict and the effects of the conflict in Afghanistan and the continuation of the suffering of people on both sides of the Dawran line is a proven and better experience, both for the nation, for the people of the country and the governments of Pakistan and Afghanistan. So we are facing common threats, and we have to address these common threats with common vision and cooperation, genuine cooperation between the two governments, and facilitate further exchange, dialogue, track to engagement between the civil society and other actors in Afghanistan and Pakistan. So here I would like to end my opening remarks, and would like to engage in further and respond to further questions that will be posed from participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jawad, for sharing your views with us. I think it's really pertinent what you've said about the fact that inclusive peace is the only way forward, and also the emphasis that you've put on the Afghanistan of today not being the same as the one 19 years ago or 20 years ago, and the fact that the youth has a very large role to play in how this scenario unfolds. Now, I would like to move on to our last speaker, Mr. Rahimullah Yusufzai, who is a Pakistani journalist and political and security analyst. He is best known for having interviewed Osama bin Laden and Afghan Taliban leader Mullah Umar. Mr. Yusufzai was among the first journalists to report on the Taliban and visited Kandahar, Afghanistan in 1995. He is one of the few experts on Afghanistan, having reported on the country since the 1979 invasion by the Soviet Union. He also frequently appears on Geo News TV channels. He is the current editor of the junk groups, The News International at the Peshawar Bureau, and is an op-ed writer for Monthly Newsline. He has served as Times Pakistan correspondent. He has also been a correspondent of BBC's Pashto and Urdu services in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. He is considered an authority on Afghan affairs and on the ex-federally administered tribal areas of Pakistan. And acknowledging his achievements, he has been awarded the Tamgha-e-Imtiyaz and the Sitara-e-Imtiyaz by the Pakistani government. So Mr. Rahimullah Yusufzai, if you're online, there's a feeling of deja vu that people are sensing about Afghanistan, that there seems to be similarities with the disorder that was seen in the 90s. And with the US departure, it would be the regional countries that are directly impacted if there were to be unrest in Afghanistan, which we are seeing glimpses of now. So how do you think that we can, the regional countries can prepare for such a destabilizing scenario? And how do you see the scenario unfolding? And what future do you see playing out in Afghanistan?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Good morning and Assalamu alaikum, Zunaira. I'm grateful to the Institute of Regional Studies. They have been holding some very good discussions about a number of interesting topics. I'm honored to be on this panel. I know Dr. SAMAR for long. I believe she has lived in Quetta and she has done some work in Pakistan. And she had done some good work for human rights situation in Afghanistan, which was very challenging and very difficult at that time. I'm also happy that Mr. JAWAD, the young man, is there talking about human rights and democracy, and our guest from Romania, who has had good experience in Afghanistan. The topic you all know, many points which I wanted to discuss have already been discussed, but let me say that the prospects of security and stability in Afghanistan, I don't know anybody who does not want Afghanistan to become secure and stable after more than 4 decades of conflict, particularly during the last over 2 decades after the US NATO invasion post 9/11 attacks. However, the ground realities and the evolving situation cannot raise one's hopes that the challenges facing Afghanistan would be easily overcome. The stalemate in the inter-Afghan peace negotiations in Doha, the rise in violence, and more importantly, the final withdrawal of US-led foreign forces are some of these challenges that need to be tackled to increase the prospects for security and stability in Afghanistan. The violence could escalate as Taliban have been trying to capture more territory to strengthen their bargaining position. The Afghan forces have mostly been on the defensive, but on occasions they have launched their own offensives as well. The use of US Air Force was crucial in keeping Taliban at bay, but that may no longer be available like the past. Afghan Air Force is small and less effective, so we have to keep all this in mind as the deadline for the withdrawal of foreign forces approaches. The recent row between Afghanistan and Pakistan, following some tough anti-Pakistan statements by President Ashraf Ghani and his National Security Advisor Hamdullah Mohib, and Islamabad's angry rebuttal is another challenge, as improved Pakistan-Afghanistan relations would certainly help the prospects of peace in Afghanistan. Such statements need to be avoided. The statements were untimely also because these came one day after General Qamar Javed Bajwa's unannounced visit to Kabul that led President Ghani to appreciate Pakistan's sincere and positive role in the Afghan peace process. So what happened after only one day after a meeting which was mediated by the British Army Chief? I believe we need to have a ceasefire of statements, and stop the blame game, as Dr. SIMA said. It helped in the past and it can be helpful again if there is no blame game. The right forum to voice such complaints and grievances is the Afghanistan-Pakistan Action Plan for Peace and Solidarity, APS, as jointly decided by the two countries 2 years ago, although unfortunately only 2 meetings have been held until now. We all know the road to peace is long and difficult, but the good thing is that the talks haven't been given up and a military solution has been ruled out by all sides to the conflict. That means talks will continue even if there are hurdles on the way. I believe Taliban may attend the Istanbul Inter-Afghan Conference with certain conditions, but Doha will remain their preferred venue for the talks because Qatar has been very hospitable for them and they want to continue the talks in Doha. Turkey too has made it clear Istanbul won't replace Doha as the regular venue for the talks. Turkey and Qatar are allies also, and they don't want to harm their relations on the question of venue for the intra-Afghan talks. The Taliban position on the May 1 withdrawal, as agreed in the Doha Agreement last year, was clear. They warned that non-withdrawal would be violation of the February 29 Doha Agreement and would have consequences. However, fortunately, they haven't attacked the US and NATO forces yet, but have increased instead attacks on the Afghan forces. There has been no Taliban attacks since July last year, since February last year, and not a single foreign soldier has been killed, but many Afghan soldiers, security personnel, and civilians and Taliban have been killed. I believe Taliban won't agree to a permanent ceasefire unless they achieve something to satisfy their fighters and commanders. But ceasefire will remain the top agenda point for Kabul. For Taliban, decisions about the future government and system of governance and justice are at the top of the agenda. We also must take into account the 5.5 months lost last year after the Doha Agreement between Taliban and the US to start the inter-Afghan talks on the agreed date of March 10, 2020, due to President Ghani's refusal to release Taliban prisoners. He had to then call a wajirga to secure that agreement. But we cannot do things in a hurry to end this such a long and bloody conflict. But the next 3.5 months are critical until September 19, when foreign forces are scheduled to fully withdraw. Still, the US involvement in the Afghan conflict will continue from afar using air bases in the region. And we all know it has been trying to secure even more air bases. It already has some in Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, Jordan, Diego Garcia, and it was trying to secure bases in Uzbekistan as well. The new US peace proposals have tried to satisfy both Taliban and the Afghan government, but none are enthusiastic about the plan, including formation of transitional government. President Ghani is opposed to this idea and has made public his plans through his aides and himself to propose fresh elections in 6 months during the Istanbul conference. Taliban have rejected Ghani's proposal and elections. Taliban continue to insist on revival of Islamic Emirate and haven't made public their views on democracy and elections. Ghani, on the other hand, said he will only hand over power to an elected president, though I believe he will succumb to US pressure as he has done in the past. The Afghan government and Taliban negotiators met after a long gap in Doha during Eid, but their commitment to continue peace talk hasn't been met. There has been no meeting after that. The US will try to break the stalemate if its proposed inter-Afghan conference is held in Istanbul and attended by the foreign minister of mostly Afghanistan's neighboring countries at the UN-sponsored meeting. The US is aiming rather ambitiously to seek agreement on a peace deal between the Afghan government and Taliban at the Istanbul moot. This is overambitious, as a deal cannot be clenched in one big conference unless groundwork is done beforehand. And that conference was supposed to be only for 10 days. Now, the role of regional countries was one of the sub-themes of this webinar. It is important, but has not been given the required importance by the US in the past. Iran was ignored by the US, but finally, the US wanted it to attend the Istanbul conference. India's role is also important, and one reason is its close relations with the Afghan government. It can be both helpful, it can also be a spoiler, but it has a role. China, Russia, and Central Asian republics have their own importance, and so have Qatar. Qatar is small, but it is punching above its weight always. Turkey also has a role as the host of this likely conference. Here I would like to talk about the active role of Russia, regarding the regional countries. Russia's role has been maybe more important. It tried to kickstart the Afghan peace process by hosting meetings in Moscow whenever there was a deadlock. There was some positive takeaways from the last Moscow meeting. The participating countries, China, US, Russia, Pakistan, they called for reduction in violence and backed a negotiated settlement. It advocated that intra-Afghan talks should focus on fundamental issues such as ceasefire and formation of the future peace-centered government. It demanded protection of the rights of women, children, men, and war victims during the peace talks. Taliban didn't get the desired support at the Moscow meeting, considering the fact that they have good contacts with regional countries like Pakistan, China, and Russia, which have backed Taliban inclusion in any transitional or power sharing arrangement as a result of the peace process. Disappointed, Taliban didn't display any enthusiasm for the Moscow joint statement, while the Afghan government welcomed it. So the joint statement asked for reduction in violence by all parties. It was primarily aimed at Taliban. Taliban were asked not to launch the annual spring offensive, which they didn't do, although they increased their attacks without announcing the spring offensive. The four countries made it clear they don't support the return of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, established by Taliban when they were in power from 1996 to 2001. The statement also said all sides should opt for diplomacy and respect women and minorities' rights in place of fighting. This too was directed more at Taliban than Kabul. Taliban termed this statement as unacceptable, opposing the return of the emirate by arguing that only the Afghan people had the right to decide the kind of government system they wanted. Taliban denied responsibility for the rise in violence when its deputy leader, Mullah Biradar, maintained at Moscow that they have reduced their attacks after signing the Doha Agreement. But the US should also meet the commitments made in the Doha deal. It didn't elaborate, but it meant the non-release of further Taliban prisoners and removal of names of Taliban leaders from the UN Security Council blacklist as committed by the US in the Doha Agreement. And we know that Sher Mohammad Abbas Tanakzai, who in a way is the chief Taliban negotiator, he warned of consequences if the US didn't abide by the May 1 deadline for withdrawing its forces. But I think there have been no consequences yet because there has been no Taliban attack on the US and NATO forces after their peace agreement. So I think I will end here. We remain hopeful despite the hopelessness, but I think there is a stake for all the stakeholders to continue trying to bring peace, security, and stability in Afghanistan. It will help the Afghan people immensely. It will also benefit the neighboring countries and the regional countries and the whole world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yusufzai. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. We have a lot of questions in the chat, but before we get to those, I would very quickly request Ambassador Abrar Hussain, who was the Pakistani ambassador to Afghanistan, if he would like to quickly share some thoughts or views with us. Ambassador Abrar, would you like to share some thoughts?
Thank you. Well, just a few comments. Number one is that the key to the problem, in fact, lies within Afghanistan. Intra-Afghan dialogue. The neighbors can play a part. Yes, they have a role, but that role is limited to their influence in persuading both the parties to come to negotiations and work out what they were supposed to do. Like number one, agree to a ceasefire. Number two, work for a future political map of Afghanistan. These two things are important, but these have to be done by the Afghans themselves. Well, a third thing is also important, which was mentioned here as well, and that's about rights, human rights, education rights, women rights. So before coming to an agreement, this should be part of an understanding or a written agreement between Taliban and the other Afghans, that there should be a commitment to allowing women rights, allowing human rights, and including right to education. These are all very important things. But then, unfortunately, everything is on hold. Let's hope all parties will agree to participate in the conference in Istanbul, and there all the neighbors would be able to persuade them, and Taliban and the other Afghan parties will sit together to chalk out a future map, a future political map for Afghanistan. But as I said, the most important thing is that the solution lies within Afghanistan, and it lies in intra-Afghan dialogue. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Abrar. So now we're just going to move on to some of the questions that we've been sent. First question is for Dr. SAMAR. It's from Shahid Ilyas, who is a research analyst at Institute of Regional Studies. He has said that you rightly said that we can't deny the fact that Afghanistan and Pakistan have got problems with each other. What is at the base of the tensions between the two countries? Generally, it is said that India's presence in Afghanistan is the problem. Others say that Afghanistan's refusal to recognize the Durand Line as international border is the problem. What is your take on this, and what realistic solution can you propose?
Thank you again. I have to start by saying that I would like to thank the Pakistani government and people when we had a problem. They host a lot of our refugees, including myself, as Mr. YUSUFZAI have mentioned. I lived in Pakistan for 17 years, in Koldea actually, where now is the home of our Taliban. I think, yes, again, I would say I'm not going to, as I said, that we have to stop the blame game. I'm not going to blame the Pakistan or Pakistan government, not the Pakistan people, that they do have influence on Taliban. I don't need to list how many. I can go and list the whole thing. That is very clear. We don't need to insist on again denying this. So that is one thing. The second point that again I would say that India, Pakistan, and Pakistan, Afghanistan, the issue is the reality of the region. As I said, that we cannot choose our neighbors. You cannot choose your neighbor to have no, you cannot deny India, you cannot deny Afghanistan's existence. And we cannot deny the existence of Pakistan and the problem between Pakistan and India. My personal proposal to both India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan and Pakistan problem is to sit honestly and acknowledge the problem. If it's a Durand Line, what can we do? What should we do? If it's the India presence, we cannot really choose our friends and supporter because of our neighboring country. I mean, of course, we have to respect each other, as I keep repeating myself. That again, all the approaches and all the relationships should be based on mutual understanding and based on human rights approach. So we have the right to choose with whom we should have relationship, but we also should take it seriously that we are living in a region that we have to. So I think is my approach, and I think so far I insist that we should sit together, the people to people discussion, civil society to civil society discussion, to build more confidence and trust, and see how we can. I mean, the Durian line, from my point of view, personal view, it's recognized border. I mean, why we cannot live like the Europeans live? I mean, in Europe, you cannot see a single country that they don't have ethnic or different tribes between the two lines. If they can live together, why we cannot live together in a peaceful manner, in a better way? So I think that has to be discussed further between different groups, civil society, women's groups, and all those different actors, including our politicians, to find a solution. How can we solve the problem which exists? And why? And again, I would say that having Taliban-style government in Afghanistan Pakistan will not benefit. Remember this, as I said, that we have to learn from the history. We need to learn and remind ourselves from the impact that we had in the region. So you have Pakistani Taliban, we have Afghani Taliban, that's also the truth, and how to deal with them. Why they become Taliban and why they think that way in this century. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Samar. The next question, I think General Koldea might be able to give an opinion on this. So the question is that how can, do you see peaceful Afghanistan after the withdrawal of US forces and NATO forces? And is the Afghan National Army capable of maintaining peace in the country should negotiations fail?
Thank you very much. Very important discussions, very useful, and with a variety of points from different angles. And what I can say specifically to this question is that government, the Afghan authorities, should be at the level of higher expectation of the Afghan population. They should be ready to deal with all kinds of challenges that are coming. It's not an easy solution to improve a society, to improve a security, to improve, but they should stay in the principles and they should be tough for doing so in the area of human rights, in the area of security, in the area of democratic principles. Otherwise, it's very difficult. Romania passed from a very dark communist regime to the young, passing through a very vibrant democracy, let's put it in this way, to a kind of mature democracy. We are part of NATO and EU, and we used to be part of Warsaw Pact and part of the communist regime, one of the darkest communist regime in the world. But was not easy. You need vision and mission. You need, as it was mentioned here by Mr. ZAWULISTANI, tough management and a visionary one. Be preoccupied to do things. My approach will be always from the angle of practitioner, of doing things rather than speak about things. But at the end of the day, you should be able to negotiate, you should be able to fight if necessary, and you should be able to cooperate with neighbors, especially as it was mentioned here, but with other relevant actors and partners, as it was mentioned for one of the speakers. For the prosperity, for the well-being of Afghan society. There's no doubt that they should be prepared for all these kind of challenges. Nobody can foresee who will do what. They should be prepared for whatever that means, for the results of these negotiations. That's my approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, General. Quickly moving to our next question, and I think this would be best suited for JAWAD ZAWULISTANI. The question states that with civil society engagement being a prime step in post-conflict peace, is there any substantial possibility of engaging local community leaders in the process, especially how close the local dispute resolution system, JIRGA, is to the local population's hearts? This is by Nilab Khan, who is doing her MPhil from NBU.
Thank you so much. And I think as comparative experiences from different countries have shown, it is very key that civil society is engaged not only at the grassroots peace building, but also at high-level negotiation. And without the sustained and meaningful engagement of civil society, sustainability of peace and legitimacy of peace, especially in the eyes of the different segments of population, will be hurt. So it is very important that these groups, through different civil society engagements, can have their voices heard and are consulted on a regular basis, on a substantive basis, on the issues of peace building. When coming to the grassroots peace building, I think it is, especially for the Afghanistan people, it is very important that we do greater investment on community level and grassroots peace building. Especially, we know that Afghanistan people are not only suffering from an ongoing conflict, but also the conflict in the past decades have been fought along different linguistic, ethnic, and geographic lines. So we need to have in mind the history of the conflict and the dynamics through which the conflict evolved. So it is very key for peace to sustain, to engage those communities together, to facilitate exchange, dialogue, and trust building among these different communities. And I think civil society is best placed to do that. But when it comes to JIRGA, of course, there is some level of acceptance for JIRGA decisions. But seeing JIRGA decisions and processes from a human rights perspective, and as a young peace builder, as a young human rights activist, I think that's not a proper solution or a proper approach for peace building at the community level, especially if we are not able to introduce reforms in the processes of decision making in the JIRGA. JIRGAs are unfortunately very much male-dominated and very much patriarchal, excluding the voices of women, excluding the voices of youth. And in some cases, it entrenches impunity and bring more harms by committing and perpetuating human rights violations against women and children. So we should be, maybe we use some some structures, some processes through JIRGA, but we really need to think beyond only JIRGA when it comes to local peace building.
can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So the next question is from Dr. Shabana Fayaz to Rahimullah Yusufzai. She wants to ask that, do you see positive results of the Islamabad-Kabul diplomatic overtures in the future, specifically from Pakistan's standpoint?
I must say that, it's not going to be easy. There have been so many efforts. I mentioned the apps. Afghanistan-Pakistan Action Plan for Peace and Solidarity. 5 working groups were set up to discuss specific issues like security, border issues, refugees, trade issues. But only 2 meetings were held in Islamabad and Kabul. I think this was a good initiative taken by Pakistan and agreed upon by Afghanistan, but it has to be made more active. Fortunately, there have been so many visits, so many commitments, so many promises. But in practice, not all these commitments have been met. And I mentioned these recent statements by President Ghani and his National Security Advisor. So I think, we need to maybe engage sincerely. We cannot forget the past. There's a baggage of history, the Durand Line and the Pakhtunistan issue and the transit trade disagreements and, giving refuge to each other's opponents, political dissidents from Pakistan finding refuge in Afghanistan, and Afghan dissidents finding refuge in Pakistan. Dr. SIMA made a very brave statement saying that Durand Line is a recognized border, but she also added it should be discussed, to formalize it. I remember one of the Afghan politicians, Latif Pedram, gave a similar statement about Durand Line, and he was criticized heavily in Afghanistan. I hope Dr. SIMA is not criticized for making this statement here in this webinar. But I think that, we gain a lot if we engage and if we do trade and if we have good relation, and we lose a lot if we continue to bicker, if we continue, to blame each other for our problems. I think we should also accept responsibility of our own mistakes. And both sides have made mistakes. So once you accept your mistakes, then you can try and make amends. But I think in the last, several months, Pakistan has made so much efforts. I must tell you, Pakistan has annoyed the Taliban. Look at the recent Taliban statements warning against giving bases to the US. It was directly aimed at Pakistan without naming it. I also know from my own sources that some Taliban leaders in Pakistan have been recently arrested. I know the relations between Pakistan and Taliban are not very good. You all talk about the leverage of Pakistan, but I must say the leverage is not to the extent that is believed, especially now that Taliban have got more recognition and legitimacy. Now that they have good relations, they have been invited, they have visited so many countries. So I think we have to keep all this in mind, but I think we have no other option but to try and improve our relations that will benefit both countries.
Thank you so much. Now, Imran Sardar, research analyst at Institute of Regional Studies, would like to ask a question.
Thank you very much, Zunaira, for giving me floor for the question. I want to present my question before Rahimullah Yusufzai. Sir, as the time of US withdrawal is approaching, Pakistan's role once again is in the spotlight, as you know. But the regional situation especially, is entirely different from the day when the US marched to Afghanistan. we have now more robust strategic partnership with China. And we are also aware US-China sort of competition and confrontation. So in that, Pakistan's growing alignment with the US, I mean the revival of recently the 2001 agreement, which has an impact one way or the other on Chinese strategic interests in the region. So having said, don't you think this is contrasting to the ongoing Pak-China understanding on Afghanistan and Afghanistan peace process? I don't know whether China is on board with Pakistan on this matter or not. And also, don't you think revival of this agreement would invite Taliban to take aggressive stand against Pakistan, which might complicate Pakistan's peace efforts in Afghanistan? What do you say, sir?
Imran Sardar Sahab, I know that concern has been expressed in Pakistan regarding China's reaction if Pakistan moves closer to the US or if it provides air bases to the US. You are talking about revival of that 2001 agreement when Pakistan gave ground line of communication and air lines of communication to the US. I don't call it revival. That agreement was never suspended or scrapped. That agreement is still there, and the Americans want to make use of that. Pakistan has agreed to allow the Americans to make use of that, but I'm surprised. Why? Because those were different conditions, as you mentioned. America was going to invade Afghanistan to take revenge from Al-Qaeda and Taliban after the 9/11 attacks. Sympathies of many in the world were with the US because 3,000 people were killed in that attack on the World Trade Center. And everybody, as the Americans claim, thought that Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden were responsible and they were being harbored by the Taliban regime. But I think this is no longer the situation. Now, we were giving them supply lines. We were facilitating the Americans. We gave them 2 air bases in Jacobabad and Shamsi. And we gave them all the intelligence we had regarding Afghanistan and Taliban. We went out of the way. Musharraf was the military dictator. He didn't consult the parliament. He did this with the consultation of a few military generals. I don't know for how long that agreement will exist. That agreement was never shared with the public, with the parliament. Did that agreement also contain the clause that Pakistan will give 2 air bases to the US? Did that agreement also have the clause that Pakistan will allow the US to use drone attacks in Pakistan? For how long? Did that agreement also have so many other things which happened after that? Musharraf said after that, when he was no longer in power, that he allowed the Americans limited use to launch drone attacks in Pakistan. It was no longer limited. America launched 440 drone attacks in Pakistan in the tribal areas. And strangely enough, ironically, the drones were parked at the Shamsi Air Base in Balochistan. And they would fly from Pakistani air base, launch attacks in Pakistan, and then again land in Pakistan in Shamsi Air Base. So we never knew about this. There were allegations, suspicion, but the government never made this public. So I think it is the time now for this government to make public this agreement, to renegotiate the agreement, how much we can cooperate with the US. We should not be giving any air bases to the US now, because many Afghans, especially Taliban, will not like this. Taliban have already given a warning. You don't want to spoil your relation with the Afghan people again. And I think the Chinese will be concerned. We cannot sacrifice CPEC for the sake of American interest. And what will Pakistan gain out of this renewed cooperation with the US? Will the Americans help us on resolving the Kashmir issue? Will the Americans help us in limiting the role of India in Afghanistan? Will the Americans help us with more trade or economic support? I don't think that is going to happen. Americans want to contain China, and we can never be a party to that. So that's why I believe that this old agreement, which is there and which is going to be implemented, should be made public. The parliament should decide. The way the parliament decided in Pakistan that Pakistan will not send troops to Yemen to support the Saudi and the UAE invasion. That was the right decision, and the parliament should be allowed to debate this, and I believe the Prime Minister of Pakistan will not allow air bases. I think he will stand by his old position. I don't know about the other stakeholders, but I think we must do things which are in Pakistan's interest and not only in American interest. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So as we're running out of time, I greatly apologize to anyone whose questions we weren't able to address during this time, but I know that my speakers have very limited time that they were able to give us, so I don't want to ask too much of them. However, I would request if any of the speakers would like to give some concluding statements, maybe just 2-3 lines about something that we must take away from this discussion or something that we must work on, then feel free, the floor is yours.
I think we should allow questions instead of asking us again to talk. We have talked enough already.
10 minutes.
As it's a very important subject, if all the speakers do have the time, I would request if we could extend this session by about 10 minutes. I hope that would be possible.
Yes, I agree. And what about the others?
Okay.
Okay, so quickly before taking up any more time, I'll just get into the next question. The next question is from Mariam Mastour, a research analyst at IRS. Her question is that it's a two-part question. It says, given the fact that Taliban is just a group which has acquired power and the national government of Afghanistan is a government made after having the lowest turnout with various allegations on elections being flawed, I would like to know who really represents the people of Afghanistan. How do the Afghans view the war of strategic interests in the region, and what are their sentiments for the US? Anyone who would like to answer that?
I think the Afghans should answer that. SIMA or JAWAD.
Jawad, would you like to address that?
Just as an idea, we have to, as it was mentioned here earlier, we have to come from a reality. The Taliban are there, relevant actors in the country. They should be part of the solution as they are part of the problem. And from these realities, we might start the discussion. Thank you. That was a short intervention.
Thank you so much for making that note, General. But I have to make it clear that Taliban cannot represent the Afghan people. They have never represented, and they do not represent now, and they will never be able and legitimate to represent the Afghan people. But at the same time, it is also true that the current government enjoys very limited legitimacy for the same reason that was raised by the person who raised this question. The election turnout was very limited, and of course, the election process was fraught with allegations and evidences of fraud. And actually, that was why we did have in both 2014, in two past elections, that was why we actually did not see the result of election and people's vote making the government, but in both cases, and the previous one it was a participatory national unity government, and to a large extent that was the same case in the past election between Abdullah and Ghani, and that was why the High Council for National Reconciliation was created to both share power, create a stronger consensus among political actors, and also share responsibility for peace and reconciliation in Afghanistan. But unfortunately, that consensus has never been strong, and the bickering between the two political rivals have always continued, and in most cases harming the will of the Afghan people and strengthening the Taliban, or creating situations and environment where the group could exploit the weakness of the Afghan government. So for any peace efforts to succeed, it is very important that a stronger political consensus is created. All different political parties, different stakeholders, as I also stressed on the imperative to include victims and victims of war, civilian victims of war, women, youth, and minority groups. It is also very important that major ethnic groups, major political groups are all on the same page when it comes to advancing a negotiation with the Taliban. When it comes to the broader vision for Afghanistan, I think there is a consensus, and that the Taliban return will not be tolerable, and that the current level of violence is not tolerable, and that there is a recognition that we must seek political settlement to the conflict. But that in most cases do not translate into a unified stance in negotiation with the Taliban. To a large part, I personally think the Ghani government is responsible for that division and lack of a strong stance, a strong and unified position in negotiation with the Taliban. And I think that also explain parts of the failure for building a regional consensus on Afghanistan peace.
Thank you so much. So just one of the last questions, I'm just quickly going to put this forward. It says that, how do you foresee Iran, China, Pakistan, and Russia unity in Afghan reconciliation process in the future, as well as for economic projects? Can this be a key determinant for peace and security in the region? General, would you like to answer that, or any of the other panelists?
Okay. Because, as we discussed, because these are relevant actors and have influence in the region, no doubt they should be involved in a way to find the best solution for Afghan people. Of course, it's not easy to put at the same table or to harmonize all the possibilities, or to harmonize all the aspects together with the US ally in the region. But no doubt they should stay on the discussion. They should involve all of them in order to find the best solution to achieve stability and sustainability, including from economic point of view. You cannot ignore, nobody, in fact, not only Afghanistan, nobody can ignore China. Nobody can ignore nowadays Russia. Of course, we have to look at your neighbors. And from this perspective, is no doubt that they should play a role. They should be in the discussions, and in order to find a good solution for Afghan people. That's my view. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just our last question, which has been sent in by Humaira Iqbal, research analyst at IRS. There are two questions. First is that there have been a lot of rounds of peace negotiations with major countries at bilateral and multilateral levels. How serious do you think the Taliban are in pursuing the peace deal? And can we anticipate a civil war-like situation and further influx of Afghans into neighboring Pakistan once September ends without a stable solution for Afghanistan? Mr. Yusufzai, would you be able to address that for us?
Yes, I think until now, Taliban are serious. They have not pulled out of the talks. For 18 months, they negotiated with the US and had that agreement. Now, since September, they are negotiating with the Afghan side. There has been no progress, but the talks, are continuing. They will continue, as far as I know. They may not be able to make any major breakthrough, but they will continue talking. Nobody will want to take the blame for ending the peace talks. I think Taliban, if you talk to them privately, they say that they have to coexist with the rival Afghans. They say that they've learned some of their lessons. We don't know, because the taste of the pudding is in the eating. Will they change? But I think they have to make public their views on democracy, on human rights, on their future political views. Will they transition from an armed group to a political party? Will they take part in elections? Earlier, they were excusing by saying there's a foreign military presence. They cannot have free and fair elections in the presence of foreign occupation forces. Now, when the foreign forces are gone, they won't have that excuse. So I think the transition, the principle of transition should be peaceful and through the will of the Afghan people. That should be the principle. If Taliban accept that, and if the other side accepts that, there's a possibility that we can have peace. The prospects of civil war will increase if the peace process fails. But I think it won't fail that easily. It won't succeed that easily, but it won't fail that easily. That's why I remain somehow hopeful that things will not get worse. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. SIMA had connection issues, so she has logged out. But thank you so much to all our panelists and our audience who has participated, everyone who sent in questions, and it has really been a very engaging and very enlightening conversation. We were especially grateful that all our panelists could join in and bring their wide-ranging expertise to this discussion. What we do take away from this is that Afghanistan has been in conflict for almost 40 years now, but so the peace process is also going to take time, and that's something that we must be working on, and we must be supporting and facilitating without it being something that we are, bringing our own interests into. Furthermore, I think what every speaker has kind of highlighted is the fact that regional peace is extremely important for the successful development of any country in the region, because as Dr. SIMA had pointed out that, if there's fire in your neighbor's house, it will reach yours. So this is something that we must take away from this. Thank you everyone again, and thank you for everyone who participated. Stop it.